Welcome to the Center of Light Radio with spiritual teacher, intuitive, musician, composer, and best-selling author of The Divine Principle, Anchoring Heaven on Earth, your host, Keith Anthony Blanchard.
The Center of Light Radio, Center of Divine Unfoldment and Reinforcement, the transformation station and radio for the soul. Metaphysics returns to Memphis August 5th and 6th at the Agra International Center with Memphis Metaphysical Fair. The Memphis Metaphysical Fair will play host to psychic mediums, tarot card readers, crystal and stone healers, and vendors. Native American motif, paranormal investigating, 20 workshops over the 2 days. August 5th and 6th, Agra Center International, Memphis, Tennessee, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. $10 for one-day adult pass and $16 for the weekend pass. Military discounts are available. Children under 12 are free. And those little rugrats, they're going to love all the gemstones and all that really cool stuff. So they're going to be occupied while you do your spiritual metaphysical thing. Workshops range from $0 to $10 each. Vendor booths are still available. You can visit memphismetaphysical.com for more information. Kenneth Pass, a recent guest on Center of Light Radio, when he was a little boy, 6, 7, 8 years old, was on a camping trip with others and some chaperones, and they went walking in the woods for a hike, and they were abducted. They were brought back. Listen to this. I know it's hard to believe, but I tend to believe the cat. Brought back 10,000 years. There's a place in Arizona called Prophecy Rock, and there's some petroglyphs on the rock. Kenneth says he is one of those children coming out of the spaceship. While he was on this spaceship ride, one of the aliens pissed him off, so he took some of the technology and hid it. He wants to go back to Arizona to find this technology that he had hidden and bring it to the Native Americans, the Hopi and the Pueblo, because he says they know what to do with it. And so Kenneth's going to log his experience and come back to Center of Light Radio for part 2. The reason I'm bringing this up is that on the Center of Light Radio.com webpage, opening page, you'll see a flying saucer. There's a lot of moving things, right? But you'll see a donate button, $5, $10. We're almost to our goal. We want to raise money. $500 is the tune. We want to give Kenneth. Kenneth is a very simple guy, a really cool guy, but a very simple cat. And put him on the bus to Arizona so he can do, excuse me, just that. Also a special announcement, Inception Radio Network. And all the shows are now being played on iHeartRadio. What a phenomenal thing. Finally it landed. That's awesome. September. This man, God-realized man from India, Swamiji Viswayogi, who I've had the blessed opportunity to interview here on Center of Light Radio a couple of times. Really excited. He's going to grant me another interview. I am blessed. I am a blessed man. So we're going to get down to Center of Light Radio business. Let me get to my notes on my guest today. Today, my guest is D. Patrick Miller. And we're going to be talking about how to heal the hurts we don't deserve. Patrick says, if forgiveness was easy, we wouldn't need it. Who will explain the process of giving over things that seem to have hurt us most by learning that it's always ourselves we are forgiving? Patrick Miller is a veteran author with dozens of books to his name, as well as a long history in the book business as an independent publisher, editor, book developer, and literary agent. I think Patrick and I need to have a conversation otherwise. His 1994 title, A Little Book of Forgiveness, was just released in the 6th edition as The Forgiveness Book by Hampton Roads Publishing. Fantastic. He has written about a wide variety of spiritual subject matter, including the general topic of how to be spiritual without being religious. The subject of his next book from Hampton Roads, coming in 2018. You can find more about my guest at www.fearlessbooks.com/forgive.html. Welcome to Center of Light Radio, Patrick Miller.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm glad you're here. As I said earlier, you came highly recommended by another phenomenal human being, a dear friend of mine, of ours, Maria Felipe. Patrick, one thing I wanted to ask you or mention was, I had a guest on my show some time back. After doing much research about what goes on in some of these Himalayan caves when these Buddhist monks meditate over the course to their way of enlightenment, that what they're doing in those caves day in and day out, or that they're finding place within themselves that they are still not forgiving others or themselves. And I thought that to be just absolutely fascinating. They're finding all those places inside that they need to forgive.
Yeah, that reminds me of central teaching of A Course in Miracles, which has been very important in my life. The very beginning of the Course, it says that we don't need to search for love or try to understand love. We only need to remove the blocks, the obstacles that we've placed in its way. That's, as a spiritual path, that's sometimes called the via negativa, or the negative way, that instead of looking toward the light and what blesses you and what feels good, you look at the darkness, you look at what's in the way, and process that. And the more you do that, the more open and clear and loving you become. It's sometimes I think, there's a lot of talk about, learning to love yourself. To me, that's never been the process. It's more learning to stop hating yourself. and then the love takes care of itself.
How does one begin to do that, Patrick? I know for those who don't know how to go inside and pry their hands off or forgive, how does one begin to do that? Because for someone who is not, to use the word, good at it, it just seems impossible.
Well, I actually have, in my book, I have a 7-step process where I kind of boil it down for people, and we can maybe go into that. But it's basically taking a look at, whatever really disturbs you or destroys your peace. And instead of assuming that it's beyond your control, assume just the opposite. Assume that by going into your mind and looking closely at the feeling that so disturbs you, and deliberately making the effort to release it, that you begin to alter, your inner landscape. And it's both easier and more difficult than people may think. Some people may think, well, I just can't let go of so-and-so. But you can. You simply have to make the effort. And I've met other people who say, well, forgiveness is not easy. It's not difficult. You just forget about it, and go on and move on with your life. And that's what I call a spiritual bypass, where you're not really dealing with the upset, and instead trying to race by it. So people can come at it, from those two different perspectives. Either I can't let it go, or I'll just forget about it. Forgiveness is the middle path, where you look at whatever deeply disturbs you and make the assumption you can let it go. And sometimes it's one of my steps is where you hold in your mind the image or feeling of whatever's disturbing you, and you say, I release you from the grip of my sadness, disapproval, or condemnation. And I use the word grip because it's very much what's going on. I think it's a biochemical thing, that we inwardly grip onto something, and it's often unconscious. We don't know we're doing it, and we just have to look at that clinging and grasping and imagine letting it go.
Would it be fair to say, if someone is even not to that level, just the idea that they repeatedly want to forgive a situation or a person or themselves, which is ultimately the case, but let's say a situation and a person in a situation, just the ongoing wanting to forgive, would that somewhat begin to open the door to where new thought modalities come in and new feeling-based modalities come in, to where the forgiveness actually begins to happen on some level, that they get the aha effect and can actually move further into the forgiveness window?
Yeah, I often refer to forgiveness as a forgotten instinct. We know how to do it, and we can get back to it, but we have to give up the opposing instinct, which is to get even, to settle things, to have power over. all of which can be very, tempting responses to the world. Someone does you wrong, and you want to not just change it or fix it, but you want to get even.
And that feels good. Think about it. I mean, at least to the person in the illusion or the situation, they are believing that it would feel good not only to get at them, but to get one more up. Not only just kill the roach, but smash the bejesus out of it. But so that being said, what would be the motivating factor for them to follow the path of forgiveness? That would say, of course, it would feel good to, knock someone out, for whatever reasons that we feel we were done something. But what would you offer as the reason, the motivating factor for them to want to move into forgiveness?
The way I put it in my book is that sweet revenge is junk food for the soul. In other words,
that was good, bro. That was good.
In other words, you get a high from it. You get something like a sugar high. You get and you get an illusion of power. And what I always tell people, sometimes people say, well, I can't forgive because it will set me up to get hurt again. And that's a misunderstanding of what forgiveness is. In fact, true forgiveness makes you stronger and more powerful, and it even helps you see things more clearly. That's why I say when some people sometimes try to do a bypass and say, well, I just don't want to think about it, I'll just move on. They're not really getting the power that they could get by looking at things more closely. So, sometimes when you're truly forgiving, in a way, you'll see things more critically. You'll actually see things more clearly. You'll see what the actual problem is because you're not so angry. Sometimes we think we have to get really, really angry to change things. In my experience, there's a limit to how useful anger is. And when it becomes kind of compulsive and 24/7, then it actually prevents you from seeing what's going on. It especially prevents you from seeing the potential for things to change. Often when we're very angry about something, we feel very wounded. We've developed an image of ourselves as wounded, and we kind of get habituated to feeling wounded. And we think that by being wounded and angry, we're being powerful. In fact, we would become more powerful if we let go of the anger and started healing the wound. But it is a fear that people have that forgiveness will make them, a patsy or a pushover, or open them up to danger, and that's just not a good understanding of what the forgiveness process is.
We're all familiar with the common cliche or sentence that forgiveness is not about the other person and letting them, quote, off the hook. Well, even that almost sounds unforgiving by using those words, letting them off the hook. That's their stuff. It's really about letting myself be free and off the hook.
Ultimately, yes. But you don't always get there right away.
Right.
You have to start with where you are. My book was originally inspired by it was written after a period of being ill for 7 years, and that was the beginning of my spiritual path. And it was during that time that I discovered how angry I was about a lot of things. And I was especially angry toward my mother, who was emotionally disturbed and had all kinds of psychiatric diagnoses and problems. And for the longest time, I thought she was the problem in my life. And big realization that I came to, and this literally took me years of work, what released me, what gave me forgiveness, was a simple realization of, oh, she did the best she could. She failed at a lot of things, but I failed at a lot of things too. And I would not judge myself for doing the best I can and failing. So how do I fail? How do I judge someone else for that? And there was a big lesson for me in that, because sometimes we think that forgiving means we've got to have big, profound realizations that have never been thought of before, you know.
I was hoping that's the way it would be. Seriously.
And sometimes that's true, but as I say, you know, I had suffered for years being angry at my mother, and the key to it was the simple realization, oh, she did the best she could. You know, and that unlocked everything. And I thought it was going to be something bigger than that. You know, sometimes it is something bigger than that. But that did get back to, well, how do I handle myself? And I realized that probably I had been judging myself for failing and not letting it be okay that I was doing the best I could. There are some more profound things that come up. You know, I think part of true self-acceptance is sort of a Buddhist notion that it's okay to die.
I get that, Patrick. I get exactly. I'm assuming what that means. It's okay to die. It's okay to let that old stagnant, old paradigm, that old world part of you just go. And you know, right. What worked for me, Patrick, and still does to this day, anytime that something manifests in my life that would cause me to be upset and harbor anger towards someone, although I may get upset in the moment and use that as a way of saying, you know, this is just something I'm not interested in, and I'm expressing myself because I don't want to keep it inside. I want to vent it out, and I'll be clear. And tomorrow I'm good, I'm done, the situation's forgiven. But anytime something arises in my life, Patrick, the first thing I go to is what have, and not in a way that I'm going to punish myself, but from an honest point of view, an honest inquiry about myself is, what have I done to bring this about in my life? So it immediately puts me in the driving seat with my hands on the steering wheel of pure power versus, oh my God, I can't believe this happens, and begins to harbor this over a period of time. So I asked myself the question, obviously I've done something to bring this about in my life, and there's no longer for me any future forgiveness work that has to happen. I'm not saying I'm pure and that I'm completely sad and done with the situation, but I know the hooks that it could have, the grip, as you mentioned, it could have had in me does not exist for taking such posture.
Right. I mean, there's a sense in which we create our own reality, not in the sense that we create all our material circumstances and, you know, everything that we perceive around us, but we do choose how we see everything. If two people are sitting in a room and side by side and we're asked to describe that room in an objective way, they would probably come up with completely different descriptions of what's there, what exactly the colors are, what it means, you know, whether the room is expansive or confining. The way they would just describe physical surroundings will reflect what's going on inside them. And by the same token, when you get to perceiving what's going on emotionally and perceiving what's going on in relationships, yes, you're creating what you think is happening. And as I say, with my mom, I thought for years she was a terrible person out to hurt me. And that was the perception I had chosen. Therefore, that was the reality. And how I got back to forgiving myself was that I realized after I'd been out on my own for some years that she didn't really have much influence on my life anymore. But she might as well have been right beside me because I had incorporated the things that I thought she had done to me, and I was doing them to myself. And this is often the case with chronic relationship problems, particularly if we're looking back on a past relationship, or say a parent who's passed or something. It's not so much what the other person's really doing to us anymore, it's what we took on, how we took over for them.
And how it continues to play itself out until it runs the course.
Yeah, or the problem is that the course is often a repeating cycle. And so it's never going to run its course in terms of fixing itself. That's why I say in the book, you know, a grievance will never resolve itself. Repeating it over and over, there is no logic to it. It's a closed logic loop. It's always going to tell you the same thing. And you
so
really
what is the gig from this point forth? Is it about becoming conscious or just becoming aware of the situation? Because if awareness is light, just by being aware of it, doesn't that change it on some level?
Well, I think you have to have the desire to see things differently. You have to be willing to admit the possibility that I may not have the whole story. That's why in my first step of forgiveness is to look very closely at whatever is disturbing you and review it completely. And by completely, I mean from different points of view. Not just the same old story that you've been telling yourself, but stepping back. Maybe, if you were the victim of someone perpetrated something against you, stepping back and looking back at it, imagining it from their point of view. Then imagining it from an objective point of view, as if you were, watching the scenario from above and watching yourself behave. Also, reviewing it in detail means looking for its potential. What maybe was there to teach you that you haven't gotten yet? Because anytime that we have something chronic and unforgiven, we have kind of fixed the storyline of what happened forever. There's no possibility of what happened ever changing in our minds. But the fact is, we seldom actually remember what happened. In fact,
I believe it or not, I get that. Yeah, because something happens and I see it through my keyhole, and that's the way it happened. But somehow, over a period of time, it begins that vision or the perception that we thought we had. It actually begins to fade. Is that what you mean?
It can begin to fade just out of exhaustion. That's where the old saying about
right.
That's where the old saying of forgive and forget comes from. And I think, we do forgive and forget some lesser things. The things we don't forget are the things we deliberately keep remembering in an obsessive way because we don't want to forgive them. So that's why I say the process is not forgive and forget. It's to remember completely and then forgive. And if you do that, over time, some grievances will drop away, and a few years later, you'll suddenly realize, oh, I used to be really bothered by so-and-so, and now it's just not an issue. So I think you have to take a serious look at how much your picture of yourself, your idea of yourself, has to do with grievances. And in the process of my illness and my spiritual awakening, what was, kind of horrifying for a couple years was realizing how much of what I thought was real had to do with anger and grievance.
So I heard you mention this a little earlier about your illnesses early on, and you mentioned it again. Are you alluding to the fact that through this awakening process, the anger and the lack of forgiveness you had somehow changed you health-wise because of?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, can you give us a little more about that? Actually, we're at the bottom of the hour. 888-919-2355. If you want to call in and speak to myself, my awesome guest today, Mr. Patrick Miller, please dial that number, 888-919-2355. Patrick, would you give out your contact information, how our listening audience can find you, and more about what you're doing and your books on forgiveness? And then when we come back from the bottom of that, answer that question, if you would, about how your radical change, your awakening, your self-forgiveness and releasing of anger brought your health back to snap.
Alrighty. You can find out about my work at www.fearlessbooks.com. And my forgiveness book is specifically at fearlessbooks.com/forgive.html.
Keith Anthony Blanchard here with Center of Light Radio to remind you about my lifelong work, RPM, Recognize, Plug In, and Manifest Your Life. Let me ask you a few questions. What is it you want out of your life? You want more financial stability? You want relationship? You want greater degrees of bliss, conscious expansion, and spiritual evolvement? These are magnificent, wonderful things, and I have achieved all of these by implementing what I am offering to you so you can apply this to your life so you can have all those things that you truly desire and truly deserve. I absolutely guarantee my work 100%. Go to Center of Light Radio, look at the opening page, the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Not only will you receive my awesome Power Pack newsletter monthly, but you will have access to my RPM program. Stay in touch with me, and I will send you everything I'm about, all my successful works. You can bet. All you have to do is contact me, Keith Anthony Blanchard at gmail.com. Peace, love, and light to you always.
Yeah, many years ago, I was fell suddenly ill, and by suddenly I mean overnight, and stayed ill for 7 years. It took about 6 months before I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and at the time that was a fairly new diagnosis, which is why it took a while for it to stick. And the problem then, as it is now, with chronic fatigue syndrome is that it's difficult to diagnose. There really is it has to be diagnosed by someone with the experience and knowing what it is. There's not a test for it. And there's really no good medical treatment for it. And that hasn't changed in 30 years. So pretty soon I was left with the obvious necessity that I had to figure this out myself. Nobody was really able to help me. I found some things. Acupuncture was a little bit helpful. Working on my diet was helpful. But nothing altogether was working. And I gradually had to look at why would my whole body collapse? Why would everything just stop working? And the key was when I learned that chronic fatigue syndrome is an autoimmune failure, and in the particular, as opposed to AIDS, which is also autoimmune, AIDS is when your immune system is destroyed, collapses. Chronic fatigue and some other autoimmune things are the result of the immune system being hyperactive, literally over-defending.
Is it the autoimmune system, is it attacking itself?
Yes, yes.
And isn't that sort of a physical manifestation of what the spiritual possibility of not forgiving self is an attack on the self, and it's a manifestation of that?
Exactly. And
wow.
that was the big realization I had to go through, was that I thought the way to deal with the world was to constantly be kind of wary of it and angry and ready to fight back. And at a certain point, at a deep unconscious level, my body said, you can go ahead with that if you want, but I quit. It gave up the battle. I do not mean to say, and I'm always careful when I speak to people struggling with chronic fatigue, that I'm not saying it's always caused by anger. I'm saying in my case it definitely was, but that was less important really than deciding what do I do about it. And that was what put me on a path of forgiveness. And believe me, I'm one of these people who would have thought of forgiveness as weakness. While I've always been a writer, at the beginning of my career I was an investigative reporter, which means that I was coming from a worldview of there's something wrong with the world and it's somebody's fault out there, and I'm going to find them and expose them, and then everything will be great. It only took me a couple years to realize that doesn't actually work. Because even when you find the bad guy and identify them, there's a whole line of them. There's,
yeah, it's endless.
So you're not going to save the world that way. And, so it was a very difficult process for me to give all this up, to constantly see everything going wrong as out there. And I was the judge of all the things going wrong in the world, and pull that back and say, what if things are going wrong within me? Particularly the way that I see the world. And while there was definitely no overnight cure, it did take me 7 years process. This book on forgiveness, it's literally the guidebook to what I went through and how I came out. It was after that 7-year period that I got the inspiration for this book. I wrote most of it. It's a short book. I wrote most of it in a week, and then went through some revision process, and it was, just all this stuff poured out. A few years ago, I wrote an essay about my mother called The Perfect Mother, and it was a reflection on how I'd reached a point where I realized that I had the perfect mother to become the author of a book about forgiveness. And therefore, she didn't do anything wrong. She was the perfect mother for what I became. And in the essay, I asked, would it have been better if she'd been the perfect mother, so I didn't have to learn forgiveness and write a book that reached thousands?
Bro, that is a very, very good point, and I love hearing that from you. Yeah, we can look at mom being this whatever, but you come into that realization, and what you just said hit me really, really nicely, pretty hard actually. I could have had a mother that would have been a certain way, or the way I thought it should be, but I never would have learned in a level of integrating into my soul what real forgiveness is if it wasn't for her being the perfect design of a mother to place you here on this planet to where you are now, using your launching pad to help other people move into the arena of true forgiveness. That's amazing.
Right. And you can extend that principle from, you don't have the perfect mother, you don't have the perfect father, you don't have the perfect president, you don't have the perfect country, you don't have the perfect culture. The world, it's like we wake up, after childhood, we wake up into the world and something is wrong with it. Something needs to change, something needs to be fixed. And the hardest thing to learn, very difficult for me, is that, yeah, you can do something to change the world, but you have to start at the base level of how am I looking at the world? Start with how do you look at the world? Again, in A Course in Miracles, which was my central inspiration, it gives this wonderful guide for how to look upon anything that anyone does for you or to you. And that guidance is to look on anything that anyone does as either an expression of love or a call for love. And it asks, in either case, what's your response? If someone's expressing love, then you return love. If someone's calling for love, you provide the love they need. Now, that can be very complicated, of course. If you're accosted in the street by somebody with a knife and they're threatening to kill you, that's a pretty complicated call for love. And the first thing you may do is not say, I love you. The first thing is, you get the knife out of their hands and you get them on the ground. But again, it is a question of where are you coming from? Do you see this disturbed person with a knife or the gun or whatever as the bad thing that must be eliminated? Or the person who's struggling with something probably similar to things you've struggled with and has come up with a terrible solution, a terrible means of approaching that problem. And you can look back and think, well, I've chosen some terrible means to solve problems myself. So we're not, and again, this gets back to the question of whether you see forgiveness as weak or not. Many years ago, I studied Aikido, which is a defensive martial art,
and a serious one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's badass.
Not exactly nonviolent, but defensive. You don't, and founder once said, Morihei Ueshiba once said that the aim of the practice, the whole reason to achieve the highest degree of the black belt, was to have the capacity to walk into a room and quell any conflict with your presence alone. No techniques, no physical action. You walk into the room, conflict stops. He said to have that kind of presence, you must master the techniques.
So the techniques are sort of a, what is the word I'm looking for? The martial art practice where it's not really Tai Chi. So the techniques are Tai Chi-like to where, or even like yoga. By using the techniques, it brings you to a heightened state of awareness. Yes, is that what you're bringing about?
Yes, it refines your consciousness,
Oh, dig that.
Forgiveness is pretty much the same way. It's not just a response to difficulty. It's a way of seeing the world differently. As you become accustomed to that way of seeing the world differently, you just start encountering fewer conflicts. You make less trouble for yourself. You don't get into as many troublesome situations as you did before, because you have that assumption that people are either expressing love or asking for love. And that's all that's going on. That's the sum total of what's going on.
That you said that a minute ago about, you're on the street and someone pulls out a knife, you don't just start screaming out, "I love you, give me a big, warm, fuzzy hug." Well, that's kind of funny that you say that, because a few days ago on Facebook, I saw this video, and it was real. It seemed every bit legit to me. This man walks into a police station, I believe in Taiwan, with a knife, and he's about to approach a police officer with this knife. And the police officer, he could have pulled out his pistol and shot that guy dead, as police officers do. But he didn't. He took his gun out of his holster, he put it on the desk, he opened up his arms as wide as if it was Jesus Christ being, busted wide open. And he made the guy relaxed and comfortable, and he told the guy, "Come over here," and he gave this guy this really big hug, and the guy just bawled. There was no remorse. He felt remorse immediately, the guy who did it, and there were no charges pressed. In fact, he was upset because they lost a guitar. The police officer happened to have a spare guitar, and it was just this amazing, beautiful thing to watch unfold. That being said, has there come a time in your practice of the forgiveness practice? Often in my life, Patrick, actually some years ago, I realized at least my path was about addressing fears. Now, let's liken all the fears that a person may have, or all the forgivenesses or unforgivenesses a person may have, to an old rotten tree in the backyard. Now, we can pull out a chainsaw and cut every branch, and eventually do the work. Every branch we cut is doing the work surrounding the fear or the unforgiveness. Now, eventually, we'll be done with it, and we're clear. Or you can pull out a chainsaw and whack the tree from the bottom, and it all be done. Have you found yourself ever in a place to where, instead of doing at it by taking little bites of an apple, that you just found a place inside of you that you were able to dissipate all the lingering little phantom unforgivenesses?
It's an interesting question. What comes to mind more so than that is the feeling that I just get myself into less trouble than I used to. I'm not looking for a fight, So because I'm not, it doesn't happen. Whereas when I was an investigative reporter, I sort of the code of the profession was the more people you piss off, the better job you're doing. And I make a lot of people angry, then you must have done a good job. And I got tired of that really quickly, because I was ill all the time. I was stressed all the time. I was actually not bad at it. I got quite a few people pissed off. I got a U.S. senator pissed off one time, but I couldn't see, where that was going to lead to anything. I did see that video you mentioned, and one thing I wanted to say about that is that in America, we equate power generally with a bigger and bigger gun, and there would be the assumption that crazy guy comes into the police station with a knife. You got to pull out your gun and take him out. What impressed me about that might not be immediately obvious, was how powerful that police officer was. An incredible confidence and power to just sit there and say, this guy's not going to hurt me. You know. Now, I think probably some of that comes from training. You know, but also from a personal awareness of confidence.
Yes, thank you very much. He had a personal awareness about himself, that as he read the situation, he saw that man in that moment as a cry for love, completely. Right. He was not a threat. He was just crying out.
Right. And compare that to America, where people are getting shot by the police because the police think they have a gun. You know, it's almost their immediate assumption, which shows, for one thing, poor training, but not just technical training of how do you handle violent situations, but also spiritual training of how do you handle yourself under pressure. And when you are
not well,
when you are in an unforgiving state of mind, you absolutely will see danger everywhere. When you're in a more forgiving state of mind, you actually have a better perception of things. Years ago, I interviewed a teacher of the course, David Hoffmeister, and we were talking about this issue of courage and fear. And he talked about how he was once standing on a street corner in Cleveland, Ohio, with a bunch of people, and a bus backfired. And it sounded exactly like a gunshot. And he said people were like ducking and covering, you know. And he immediately knew that it was a bus backfire. So he just kind of, you know, jolted a little bit and remained. And he said, I then realized I would have done what everyone else did before I had a forgiveness discipline, because I was frightened by the world before I learned to start forgiving.
Would you repeat that again, that statement? To a person who is looking through unforgiveness, everything. How did you say that again, please?
To a person who's looking at the world in an unforgiving way, danger is all around.
Wow. That's awesome.
And that's why I say forgiveness actually gives you clarity and power. You learn. It doesn't mean that you never see danger. It means you have a better perception of when it's real and when it isn't. And when you see something going on that's just a reflection of your own anger, like the cop in the police station, in a sense, he wasn't looking to be attacked. He wasn't fearful about it. So he sees an unstable guy come in with a knife, and probably the way he handled it in his mind was, this guy needs to be calmed down. You know, he doesn't need to be shot. That's not going to solve the problem here. He needs to be calmed down. How do I do that? First thing, I put my weapon away. That shows a lot of power.
Completely.
Even though the other guy didn't have a gun, still, to be confronted with weapon and put yours away means you have a strong presence of mind and a lot of confidence. But it's not a confidence that comes from, oh, I could take this guy out with my bare hands.
No, you're right. That is completely two different energetic signatures, completely different. Absolutely.
Right. It's a confidence that comes from being able to see, oh, this guy is suffering and we need to do something about that suffering. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you stronger to have that perception. Now, if the guy came in with a gun, yeah, maybe you got to answer with a gun, because things happen, as we seem to have a hard time learning in America, things happen much faster with guns. And, you know, somebody gets in a bad mood and they go shoot somebody. You know, it's too often the way that we think things ought to be handled. But I'm always stressing to people that, you know, forgiveness is not weakness. It's just the reverse. It's the key to having that powerful presence where, first of all, you don't get in so much trouble because you're not looking for it or expecting it. And second, you have a clearer perception of what's actually happening in a stressful situation.
And what to do in said situation, because you're clear-minded, you're not monkey-minded, which allows no light, no awareness, no visibility to come in. So when you take that kind of position, yes, Patrick, that you're clear, you're open, you're able to process what are your options.
Right, and to be much smarter as a result. If you think that the answer to every danger you might encounter is to have a weapon on you, then you're likely to use it, or misuse it. It becomes the answer to everything. Whereas if you're relying on your own consciousness, your own clarity, and your own, readiness to respond in a helpful way, you're actually stronger than you would be otherwise. You're not depending on a gun or a harsh word or an aggressive demeanor.
Patrick, I often said people who are gun nuts, they like guns. I understand they might have a gun for a certain recreation or whatever, but people who use guns for protection often find themselves in such positions where they need to use that gun, and they affirm to themselves and justify it by saying, "You see, I told you I needed the gun."
Yes, and even much more tragically, the gun goes off in the hands of children and so forth. And that's the problem with the state of mind that leads to the conviction you've got to have that kind of protection. It reflects an inward weakness. I have no other way to deal with any stress or conflict than to be armed, because I don't trust my own smarts and clarity and ability to relate constructively. Not everything that is stressful or seems like a conflict or offends us is dangerous. Not everything has to be met with maximum force. Just as the cop in the police station knew. Yeah, just because there's danger doesn't mean it requires maximum force. In that case, it required no force. It required empathy, which that cop was smart enough to know how to supply. The troubled guy with the knife handed it over to him.
And, added to that scenario, if that cop would have drew his weapon and shot that man dead, now he has to go home and go to bed with the fact that anyone would try to justify, well, he pulled a knife and I was fearful of my life. But he doesn't have to do that. He went home, went to bed, and felt, pat on his own back of how he handled the situation. I totally agree. It's not a weakness. It's actually a superhero power, completely.
And also, the other side of that, the troubled man's family doesn't have a cause against the police. Because their response would be, if he'd been shot, well, he didn't mean to hurt anyone, which is absolutely true. But if you shoot him down, then suddenly you've got a very angry family or neighborhood, and they have a just cause from their point of view in hating the police. Yeah, I really wish our police departments had a lot more meditation training, or any. I don't know if they have any.
That would change the whole dynamic of it all, if you ask me.
I actually, I interviewed, years ago, a fellow, his name was Richard Heckler, who taught Aikido and meditation to the Green Berets. And he later taught them to the Navy SEALs and Air Force and other elite military units. And it's now much more common in the military than you might expect. Some kind of mindfulness training, and it can definitely be done. Right now, we don't seem to have the national mood for that to happen. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen. And in many ways, I think anyone working in the fields of consciousness and spirituality and meditation, your work is more important than ever. When we have a national mindset that's going more mindless every day, it seems. But you don't have to go that way. You stick with what you know that works.
Patrick, we are at the top of the hour. I love doing this show, and I'm thinking about listening audience. Per request of DD in the chat room, he's been on me and on my tail pretty hard about expanding this show to 2 hours. I think in the next month or so that is going to happen, but it's going to happen on the front of the show, not the back. That being said, we're at the top of the hour, and it flies by fast when I have this kind of fun. Patrick, would you leave our listening audience with a final thought, sir?
Just to repeat myself, that forgiveness is the key to strength and power. It's not a surrender or a giving up or a caving in or giving in. And as you said, definitely not just letting yourself or anyone else off the hook. It's really a key to power.
Patrick, thank you for being a wonderful guest here on Center of Light Radio. I really enjoyed my time with you, sir.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I look forward to chatting with you soon. Everyone, Mr. Patrick Miller, D. Patrick Miller. You can look at the comments on my webpage. You can find out more about him at the website. Let me pull up his website. He deserves it. That's for sure. The website, you can find him at is www.fearlessbooks.com. fearlessbooks.com/forgive.html. Again, it's www.fearlessbooks.com/forgive.html. And I think that's the link to his book. So I'm sure his website is fearlessbooks.com. Next week on Center of Light Radio, we have Dr. Ed Wige, and she's going to be talking about her craze book, which is, no pun intended, You're Not Crazy, You're Awakening. 2 weeks from now, Dr. Eben Alexander, he's popular for his book, Proof of Heaven. He was a neurosurgeon that died and went into a coma and came back and had this most amazing story to tell. I was lucky to get this guy because he's very, very busy in the field because of such an experience. Also in September, this beautiful man, Swamji Viswayogi, is going to be coming back to Memphis, and he's granting me another interview. I can't begin to tell you what it feels like to be around the presence of a God-lit man. Wow. It's not something to be said. It's something to be felt. I've seen him quite a few times in his omniscience. I have. Knowing things that there's no way he can know and just spits it out like it's just nobody's business. But my point being saying that it's not because of the bells and whistles about such. It's about the fact that such divinity is alive and doing the work here on this planet today. And that kind of beacon of light, that kind of lightning rod, when it moves about the world, things begin to change. His tour right now is called Healing the World by Purifying the Waters, to the last that I was told. I look forward to seeing you Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I am sitting in these chairs conducting the affairs of the heart because my heart is in what I do. I like helping people. It expands me, and my gift in turn is to help expand you as we move about the world and make this place a beautiful place for everyone. When you lay down at night, you have nothing to do, might as well breathe. Breathe yourself into oblivion, and you will punch a ceiling through your thought. And you find yourself in a profound, deafening silence. Be still and know that I am God is a piece of scripture you can refer to. And when you find yourself in that silence, the universe becomes your oyster. Peace, love, and light. Yep.